Alright, so we're 1 month after Tears of the Kingdom's release date. And even though it's very early days yet, it's only been a month since the game was released, it's definitely successful, selling about 10 million units in 3 days. But I'm kind of asking myself, and I'm sure other people are too, what's next for the series? Just to be upfront about this, I'm not going to reference specific story beats from the game. I'm going to reference a few plot lines and some plot details from other Zelda games. But if you don't want to know anything about I guess the Zelda franchise, then yeah, you might want to click off this, or go and finish the game, give it a good 60 hours and come back. So I want to talk a little bit about what's next for Zelda as a series, but in case you're wondering what's next for you, maybe you can click on the like button and subscribe, If you enjoy the video, it'd be really appreciated, because it helps me out a bunch. Thanks. So going forward for the series, producer Eiji Aonuma has said that the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom model is kind of going to be the blueprint, I guess, for the games going forward, which I can entirely understand why they would do it, because they offer such a great level of freedom to the games. Personally, for me, anytime I'm playing it, I'm like, man, I'm like a kid again. I don't know what's in this world, I don't know what's going on, but I'm gonna go find it. And I find this announcement a little bit bittersweet. Not that it's a bad thing, I really like the models of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I feel like this could mean that new Zelda content may be quite slow going forward in terms of how often we get a new Zelda game. Like Breath of the Wild took about 6 to 7 years after Skyward Sword, Tears of the Kingdom took about 6 years after Breath of the Wild, so the next main series release we'll get is probably going to be 2028, 2029, which feels like a long time away. So it just feels like that, it's going to be a long wait in between new Zelda entries, considering how much effort has to go into building the world. Which is fine, but just, I like Zelda games, so I'd like to see them a bit more regularly. Now, in saying that, that doesn't discount the idea of re-releases. We could easily get ports of Windwaker or Twilight Princess, or get more remakes like Link's Awakening in the meantime. But one thing that I like about the Zelda series in the past is that it's had all this variety, all these different styles of games, all these whether it's 2D or 3D or the different art style. I just hope that going forward it's not just a Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom art style, that they're willing to change it up even more. Another reason why I find it a little bittersweet is just the story aspect of the games. The Legend of Zelda has never been Oscar award-winning writing or anything. I mean, just look at the Zelda timeline. It's ridiculous. And I feel a lot of the focus on Zelda games have been the focus on exploration, or hell, even just having a vibe, Majora's Mask is a vibe. You play it and you're like, man, everything's sad. It's just one gripe I have with Tears of the Kingdom, that I felt some of the story beats were a little repetitive to make sure that no matter what order you did the missions in, that you were getting the same information no matter what point you did the temples or whatever story beat. And I think that's kind of a shame, because in Tears of the Kingdom, and mild spoilers here, there's a set of missions called Tears of the Dragon, which I think is really good story-wise, especially because it develops the character of Zelda a little bit more. But I shotgunned those missions, so all that backstory and I guess additional lore to the game, it all just got compacted into that time for me. Whereas if you have a slightly more linear game, you can curate that story a little bit better, that you have the reveals occur more naturally, rather than me just shotgunning them and going, oh, I need to go here, okay, cool, oh, I need to go there, cool, and then just being like, okay, I did all those missions, anyway, back to trying to beat Ganon or whatever. But in saying that, these games are pure utter video games from the point of view of you're thrown into a world, figure it out, story isn't a priority, you're given one objective from the start, go. So I can see why story wouldn't be a major factor, but just personally, I like story in games. So in terms of what's in store for the next game, I can't speculate story-wise what they can do. I think there is a chance that they could reuse the same map again, but I think they really need to do something new to keep it fresh, especially when, we've had 2 games of the map. They need to really introduce some new mechanics to it. So I have some suggestions here that might be acceptable, especially when I feel that Tears of the Kingdom has taken a lot of inspiration from Skyward Sword. I think it would be important to keep an eye out for if they do any re-releases of old Zelda games, because they re-released Skyward Sword in the lead up to Tears of the Kingdom. I think that if they re-release some of these older Zelda games, that could point to something a little more close to what they might be doing in the next Zelda game. So I think if they take inspiration from Wind Waker, I think they may change the world dramatically in terms of, flooding it, but improve on exploration from a water perspective that, maybe you can swim properly, or you may have a vehicle, something like the King of Red Lions from Wind Waker, that you have to adapt into the world, that you have the Ultra Hand ability, that you may need to use, whatever vehicle you have or whatever boat you have to investigate the water further. Maybe you have to convert it into a submarine at points, or maybe you can go on land as a little bit of a tank or something, and maybe your underwater exploration is limited to where you are in relation to that vehicle. And story-wise, it's something like that. Flooding a whole region can take hundreds, if not thousands of years. So theoretically, you could do the same as they did in Wind Waker and have an entirely new Link and Zelda pair that it's just set way far into the future that might reference what happened in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. The next mechanic I feel is also kind of Skyward Sword inspired, but it's a little bit of, most Zelda games, and that's time travel. In particular, there's a mission in Skyward Sword where you're in a desert and you have these stones that can change what point in time you're in. So when you activate the stones, this old desert returns into this beautiful, vibrant sea. I think they could do something like this for Breath of the Wild, but maybe each time you activate the stones, that it restores a certain part of the map, or restores even a small area in the map, so that you see buildings before the Calamity War, or before, anything that happened previous to all of the bad events in Hyrule, so that you could use that to solve puzzles. So it's like, oh, well, this whole cave has collapsed. Maybe I need to use this stone to move through the cave to move rubble or whatever. There's a lot of uses in that I think could be fun to play with. I think that might be a smaller mechanic and a much bigger time travel mechanic, but I think that would be a cool idea to have in the world for solving puzzles and actually navigating the world. Okay, here's my last one, and this very much links to links. I'm dumb. This last one that I have very much relates to Link to the Past or Link Between Worlds. You might have the same map of Hyrule and all the areas in it, but you have to go between either the Dark World or Lorule again to try and solve puzzles, but maybe you have to switch between them regularly for puzzles, or going between them for different dungeons, or encountering new and different characters. If you're in something that's a dark reflection of Hyrule as it is, maybe the antagonists for the game could be an evil Zelda and Link. I mean, they've both been such high focuses for the last two games. I think it'd be interesting if you were to encounter dark versions of them and have two worlds collide in that way. It's very early days, and I'm very aware that I'm speculating highly on these things. I just think that depending on how they move forward with the Legend of Zelda series, I think that could indicate how they work on the new game. It's entirely possible that they could just do a whole new map of Hyrule with completely different versions of Link and Zelda and Ganon. Look, I'm just looking forward to more Zelda, and I've played through Tears of the Kingdom. I really enjoyed it, but I do have a fondness for the older style as well as this new style, and I think it's important to keep an eye going forward to see what way they move things. I think that could have a great indication as to what comes next for this new formula for the series going forward.